Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Learning Media Literacy and Fighting Fake News with LAMBOOZLED. I'm Jennifer Feldman, Director of Teachers College Press. And Teachers College Press is the proud publisher of LAMBOOZLED, the media literacy card game. It was about 4 years ago, in the aftermath of the 2016 election and the proliferation of fake news, when Dr. Ioana Literat and Dr. Yoo Kyung Chang began their efforts to create the media literacy education tool that would become LAMBOOZLED. This game is targeted towards middle school and high school age students. Given the advances of the internet and mobile technology, children have greater access to information today than at any point prior in human history. Yet the skills necessary to determine fact versus fiction on social media and to analyze news reports are lacking. Without comprehensive media literacy education and the skills it develops, the rising generation will increasingly struggle to discern between real and fake news and undermine, possibly, their ability to participate in reasonable discourse in society. Fortunately, states are addressing this concern and are adding media literacy into their K-12 curriculum as a requirement, including applications within social studies, language arts, government, science and STEM, among others. It is particularly fitting for this event to be presented today during Media Literacy Week, as initiated by NAMLE, the National Association for Media Literacy Education, as well as Global Media and Information Literacy Week, facilitated by UNESCO. LAMBOOZLED was born out of a Provost Investment Fund grant at Teachers College and has already won an award for Best Empirical Research, Media, Culture, and Learning from AERA, the American Educational Research Association. And now I would like to introduce our two creators and presenters today. The first I would like to introduce is Ioana Literat, who is an assistant professor in the Communication, Media, and Learning Technologies Design Program at Teachers College, Columbia University. She is also a board member of the National Association of Media Literacy Education, NAMLE, and the 2020 recipient of AERA's Early Career Award from the Media, Culture, and Learning SIG. Dr. Yoo Kyung Chang is a learning experience designer and a lecturer in the Communications, Media, and Learning Technology Design Program at Teachers College, Columbia University. This product was developed in collaboration with the Media and Social Change Lab, the MASCLab, which is a hub for multimodal and digital scholarship that explores the relationship between media and social change. MASCLab is housed within the Communication, Media, and Learning Technologies Design Program at Teachers College, Columbia University. And with this, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Literat and Dr. Chang.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for the lovely introduction. And thank you and TC Press for the amazing support along the way. We are so grateful for this collaboration and really happy to be partners in LAMBOOZLED. I will start by telling you a little bit about how we developed the game, our design process, our thinking in designing both the narrative and the content of the game. Then we will show you a couple of videos that help you really get a better sense for the game, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Yoo Kyung Chang, who will be talking about our efforts in evaluating it and the kind of support that we're providing educators in implementing the game in various settings. So first I must say, can we go to the next slide, that this game has been 4 years in the making. When I finally got my package from TC Press the other week, it really felt like a surreal moment. it was unbelievable that I was holding LAMBOOZLED in my hand after going through so many prototypes, as we'll be talking about in a second, and so many iterations, and honestly a lot of points where we thought that the game will just not become a reality because of different challenges that we've had along the way. We started thinking about this game in the aftermath of the 2016 presidential election, when I remember very vividly this meeting that we had at MASCLab. It was the Wednesday after election day. And it was an interesting mix of paralysis, but also this overwhelming motivation to do something and to roll up our sleeves and really figure out how we can help and what we can put out in the world. And something that really was foregrounded by the 2016 election was the critical need for media literacy education, not only among youth, but especially among youth, the voters of tomorrow. And so thinking about the mission of MASCLab, which is really making media and conducting research at the intersection of media and social change, we figured that we can play a small part in media literacy education, and especially in thinking in more innovative ways about media literacy education. We know that media literacy education is a problem across the board, across all demographics. Can we go to the next slide? But we especially know that it is a critical need for youth. So just looking at this recent Common Sense Media survey, among US youth aged 10 to 18, 31% said that they shared a news story and later found out that it was fake. And more than half, 56%, feel they cannot reliably tell fake news stories from real ones. There's also an additional problem, and that is youth feeling disconnected from the news. Young people feeling cynical about the news. Can we go to the next slide? As a lot of research is showing, they feel very skeptical about the news. They feel distanced from the world of journalism. Their trust in news and journalists is low. And they don't really feel that news is relevant to them. So this issue of, lack of motivation and lack of perceived relevance is something that was a very significant catalyst for us in the development of LAMBOOZLED. And as I'll talk about in a second, one of the reasons why we decided to focus on games as a promising but underutilized route or channel for media literacy education. Next slide. Of course, we've seen, especially in recent years, a lot of very promising and effective initiatives in the media literacy education field. I think even if you just look at the programming that's being represented this week in Media Literacy Week, and I encourage you to do so, you really see a field that has been growing and evolving in really exciting ways. At the same time, though, the field is still held back by significant challenges. These challenges include a lack of resources. Related to that, also lack of training and professional development that's specifically related to media literacy. Another issue that is very particular to media literacy education is the fit into the curriculum or challenges around making it fit within curriculum, because usually it's not its own subject, but has to be integrated in teachers' existing curricula and tied to the Common Core standards or other standards that might apply. And last but not least, we need to acknowledge the charged nature of the current social political landscape. And although this current political climate really emphasizes the need for media literacy education, it also complicates its implementation in practice, because to teach media literacy today is necessarily a politicized practice. So in thinking about what we can do and what we can realistically and effectively contribute to this growing field, we really landed on games and game-based learning as a promising and really underused avenue for media literacy education. Why games? Next slide. Among many other reasons, because games can really simulate complex scenarios, and we know that really understanding the ecosystem of misinformation and the larger ecosystems that are related to media literacy. These are complex ecosystems. These are complex relationships. And fake news is often really simplified in the media, but actually the dynamics, the social, cultural, political, economic dynamics that characterize fake news and misinformation are really complex. And games can, in a really effective and engaging way, tap into these dynamics and also offer immediate feedback within the game, right? So you do something and something happens. And that's really very simplified description of how you learn, how you can learn within a game. Also related to what I was talking about before, about the kind of skepticism and cynicism and lack of motivation and perceived relevance when it comes to youth and journalism, games can really address that. And because games foster agency and foster really hands-on engagement, they can help facilitate and foreground relevance, engagement, appeal. Also, within the more specific context of news and news literacy, games, and there's a lot of research on this too. I'd be glad to share more of it in the Q&A if there is time. But there's a lot of research that shows that games actually provide a really valuable opportunity to engage with journalism and with the practice of news in a situated way, in a grounded way. So these journalistic concepts and rules are not just abstract, but they're made to feel more real within this game narrative. Our approach to the design process was quintessentially iterative and quintessentially participatory. So it was very important for us to engage a variety of media literacy stakeholders in the design, development, but also evaluation of the game. So we worked with not only researchers, and even at MASCLab, we're a very diverse interdisciplinary group of researchers and practitioners, but we also engaged teachers and educators more largely, and we engaged students, we engaged youth in becoming our design partners and really helping direct our process of design. And as I mentioned in my opening, it really has been a long and winding process. We went through 4 big iteration as well as multiple smaller iterations. And I remember vividly when this game was just a bunch of cut up, cardboard and construction paper, as you see in the images here. And we kept iterating on the design and playtesting and iterating and playtesting until we felt that we were able to really address the educational aims of the game, which were to stimulate both declarative and procedural knowledge around media literacy education. And I'll demonstrate these in a more grounded way when we talk about the cards. But also to achieve this really delicate and tough balance between being fun but also being educational, which was a little harder than we thought to achieve. Can we go to the next slide? So really what we came up with is, and what we're presenting to you today, is LAMBOOZLED, which, as the name hints, is set in a fictional sheep town called Green Meadows. And the game's tagline is that in Green Meadows, some news stories just want to pull the wool over your eyes. We have a lot of sheep puns in the game, as you will discover. And so players must help the sheep citizens of Green Meadows figure out what's true and what's not by using their best evidence against each other. And really the point of the game is to have, almost like in poker, the best hand of evidence. And to really encourage players to think about the different types of evidence, the way that they might combine evidence, and really just building evidence as a way to win. Can we go to the next slide? The game revolves around 4 types of cards. We have news cards, context cards, evidence cards, and action cards. And news cards are fictional news stories about what's happening in this town of Green Meadows. And I think you noticed that we went with a fictional, very fictional narrative context. It's literally a sheep town. And we did this because we wanted to create some distance from real life politics, which can be really contentious. And we found, Yoo Kyung will talk about it more when she talks about evaluation, we found that this fictional setting really created a necessary psychological distance for students, educators, parents, etc., to engage in a very safe and non-judgmental and non-polarizing discussion around news literacy. Then the context cards are about external information that is available in a given round. So we're really trying to encourage players to not only look closely at the news card, so look closely at the news story and investigate the URL or the title or the byline or lack thereof, things that you can actually see in a news story. But also we're trying to encourage them to go beyond and use whatever external information might be available, such as checking out more information about the source, doing a reverse image search, triangulating with what other news sources are saying about the story, and so forth. So again, really pushing this idea that you need to look at the story, but also go beyond. Perhaps the core of the game are the evidence cards, and there's different types of evidence cards. Some relate to the news cards and some relate to the context cards. And like I mentioned earlier, the idea is to really use a mix of evidence cards so that your hand can really be the strongest, meaning to have the highest total number of points. You see here, for instance, on this one, it's a 3-point card. And then just to keep things interesting and make the game even more fun, and here we took a lot of feedback from young people who really like these action cards. We designed action cards as a way to introduce fun elements, luck-based elements in the game. And action cards really are just about things that can randomly happen in the game. You trade cards, you steal cards, you have the ability to switch out cards, and so forth. And now I invite you to see a couple of videos that we have about the game. The first one is a tutorial / overview video that will really give you a more vivid sense of what the game looks like and how it's played. And the second is a very brief glimpse into what a sample round might look like. And after that, you'll be hearing from my colleague, Yoo Kyung Chang, about our evaluation and implementation work.
Don't let the fake news pull the wool over your eyes. Stack up your evidence, play smart, and don't get LAMBOOZLED. The game contains 4 types of cards: news cards, context cards, evidence cards, and action cards. You start with 3 decks face down in the center of the table: news cards, context cards, and a mix of evidence and action cards. Start the round by flipping over 1 news card and 4 context cards. Deal each player 5 cards face down from the evidence cards deck. Each round, you'll use your evidence cards to support or challenge different news stories. But there's only some evidence cards that you can play. 1-point evidence cards that apply to the news card on the table, or 2-point and 3-point evidence cards that apply to the context cards and tell you what other information is available that round. Your goal is to build the strongest hand of evidence. Whether the news is real or fake doesn't really matter. It's sheep news after all. What matters is having the best evidence for it being real or fake, meaning the highest number of points when the evidence cards are added up. So on your turn, you can pick a new card from the evidence deck and keep building your case, or play an action card. Or, if you're confident that you have a pretty strong case, submit your evidence by placing those cards, not your entire hand, on the table and reading them out. This forces everyone else to submit their own best evidence, and the player with the highest number of points wins the round. If you suspect someone's evidence is shaky, you can challenge them, and the rest of the players vote whether the evidence can be used. Play as many rounds as you like, and most importantly, don't get LAMBOOZLED. LAMBOOZLED.com.
It's time to play LAMBOOZLED. All the players have been dealt their hand of 5 cards, and the dealer flipped over a central news card and 4 contest cards. Let the round begin. Looks like we can find information on the source's social media profile, expert opinions, previous posts, and other news sources. Lambert goes first. She's got a couple of 1-point cards that apply to the central news card. All caps and dramatic punctuation point to it being fake. But she doesn't have anything that applies to the context cards, and those are the big point winners, so she decides to draw another card to see if she can build up a better hand. Dolly goes next. She's got a couple of 2-point cards that apply to the context card, but one argues the story is real, and the other argues that it's fake, so she can't play them together. Dolly has an action card that lets her swap one of the context cards for a new one. She plays it, and lucky Dolly, she's got a context card she wanted. She then draws one more card to end her turn. Next up is Eugene. He has a 2 and 3-point card that applies to the context card, and a 1-point card that applies to the news card as a bonus. And they all argue the story is fake. That's a strong hand, and he's pretty sure no one else will be able to beat it. So he drops his evidence, forcing everyone else to drop theirs. Comparing all the players, it looks like Eugene does have the strongest set of evidence, but Dolly won't let Eugene fleece her. She challenges Eugene's evidence, claiming that Eugene's 1-point card doesn't actually apply to the central news card. The two make their arguments, and Lambert votes to decide who was the most convincing. In the end, Eugene is the winner of this round, but the next round is anyone's game.
Hello, this is Yoo Kyung Chang. I would like to first begin by thanking everybody who has joined us today. I think we're nearly at 90 participants. Well, thank you. And I will continue talking about what happened next. So once we thought that we had a good design, and as Ioana mentioned, we went through multiple iteration. And when we thought that we had a good playable game that would also support the learning goals that we have defined, we took it out to the test. So we wanted to see if the students were enjoying the game, if the game was playable, especially in a learning context, as it was facilitated by not by only us, but also by the educators in their own classroom, and also how it supported the learning goals. So we did this in multiple different ways. So we took it to facilitate the gameplay with the students in informal contexts, such as workshops. We also took it into the classrooms to directly observe how students played with and learned with the games. But we also invited educators from across the country to play the game in their own classroom. And when the educators reach out with their interest, what we did was we sent out the game, as well as the lesson plans that we had developed for either one 45-minute class or 2 sessions of 45-minute classrooms. The use of lesson plan into their classroom was optional, but we did provide information on how it could integrate into their curriculum by defining the core standards that may be in alignment with the gameplay, how it may be integrated into their curriculum in different class, how to prepare for, how to integrate into the classroom, how to play the game with the students, and also what to do after they play with the game. They were all provided, all the students were provided with the post-reflection questions, which delved into how they understood the learning goals that were embedded in the game, but also how they could apply that into real-life context. So we gathered a lot of different data and different types of data as well. As you can see from here, there's some of the snippets, but we talked to the students, we talked to the teachers and the educators to see how the game was working in a classroom in a different context. So at the end, we had, in terms of the teachers who participated in the evaluation, we had 11 teachers from 11 different classrooms and different grade levels, from 5 to 12th grade, and in different subject matter as well. So they were in English classroom, social studies, library science, US government courses. So they were in different contexts as well. So what did we find? First of all, we found that the game was supportive of learning for students in the classroom across grade level and across subject areas, which were very important to us. And more importantly, they were able to transfer their learning from the game into a real life context. For example, when we asked them to find a news story from online and to apply the evidence cards to examine its validity, they were able to do so. This is something that Ioana mentioned earlier as one of the important design considerations that we put into the game. The fictional narrative that we put into the game did support a deeper engagement with and discussion around the media literacy skills. One of the things that we observed when we were play testing and developing the game in different contexts with youth participants is that any discussions around media literacy or news literacy quickly turned into a political debate, which were often very emotionally charged and sort of distracted them from thinking about the core media literacy skills. So we found that using the fictional narrative really helped addressing that those limitations or challenges. And the card game, by nature of it being accessible, it allowed for, and the way we have designed it was for a quick rounds, as you saw from the sample hand, and which allows for students to play multiple rounds. And the idea really is that as they go over multiple rounds, they become more proficient with the concepts and the terms and the skills that are embedded in the gameplay itself. And it was versatile enough to be implemented in different setting contexts as well in terms of the size and the subject matter. So some of the teachers were creative enough to implement it in as if the class size was very large, they would have students pair up to play the game. And usually the gameplay would allow 2 to 6 players. And so there were different ways that it could be implemented in the classroom, and they were equally effective. And in some cases, when the students were paired up, it allowed for additional learning opportunity because the paired students had to discuss and articulate why they would choose one hand over the other, for example. One thing that we found, and this is something that is not new in the history of instructional design, is that when you work with a very new instructional approach, such as using game as a curriculum material, the teacher's preparedness or readiness to integrate that into their classroom really did matter. So one thing that we found is that depending on how the teacher's prepared or ready to use game as part of their curriculum, that really determined whether the teacher was comfortable and familiar and fully understood how to use and what to do with the game in the classroom. And that also sort of determined whether the students really understood how to play the game, how to learn with the game, and also how well they enjoyed the game. So that based on these findings, we did further develop and revise our lesson plans. And I will talk a little more about these educational materials that we also provide. So at this point, I know that we have a wide variety of audience today, but I know that we do also have a large group of educators. So we really would invite you to play LAMBOOZLED in your context, whether it be formal, informal learning context. And you can find information about the game at TC Press LAMBOOZLED. And there are other resources, such as the videos that you just watched about how to play the game and the sample round available on the website as well. So what can you do in a classroom, right? So some of the things, as I mentioned earlier, we did first develop a lesson plan that you can use in the classroom. And what we recognize is that it really does need to be easy and accessible and relevant to the existing classroom and curriculum. So we made sure that we are defining some of the common core standards that the game and the lesson plan can easily align to. So that's the information that you would be able to find. So we created lesson plans for 1 to 2 classroom sessions, which we revised based on the findings from the evaluation. But we also have other materials that we have included, such as the post-reflection questions, to further engage the classroom in talking about these media literacy skills that were embedded in the classroom into other work that you will be doing in the classroom. We also do have additional lesson plans and materials that you can use as an addition to the lesson plan. For example, we do have educational materials where you can integrate advertorials, fact-checking, or STEM-related materials into applying the evidence cards and examining the validity of different stories and the messages and the context. We also do have a template that is sort of like structured for you to easily apply your content and your learning material into it, but something that you can extend beyond the game and the lesson plan that we have provided. So now the question comes in. So when we first initially designed the game, we were thinking about the game being played in a classroom. And in a pandemic, there might be some limitation in playing the game as we initially planned. Now, we do believe and hope that surely we will be able to return to that phase. But for now, when we are not really allowed to share any materials in the classroom, we did explore a few different opportunities to implement LAMBOOZLED in the learning context. So some of the ways we have sort of experimented is to invite the families to be involved in playing the game. So this could be families at home in different contexts. So it could be families who have the homeschooling, for example, but it could also be families invited to play the game as part of the curriculum. So in the classroom, you would share the game with the family to play as a family, which will provide an additional opportunity for the family to learn with and from each other about each other, the media literacy skills. And then you can bring it back into the classroom discussion about what you have learned in the classroom and how it relates to other curricular materials that you're covering in the classroom. The game could also be played through the video conferencing tools where the teacher could become like a proxy for the students, as the students tell the teacher what hands to play or how to go about the next steps in the game. So there are different ways you could play the game through the video and in a virtual means as well. Another opportunity that you could have to apply in the classroom is something that we have tested out through the evaluation. We have asked students to find one of the news stories, but this could be in any context of doing research and finding information online, that students could use the evidence cards to verify and to analyze the validity of the information that they're finding online as well. So we do invite you to go into the website to find all these different ideas and how you can implement it in your classroom, whether it be in formal or formal context. So what are we up to now? Apart from helping and getting more ideas about how the game can be implemented in the actual learning context, we're also working on developing the digital version of this game. This is something that we had in plan from the beginning, but now under the remote learning, it has become a very emergent sort of need. And what we're really aiming to do is to increase engagement with the gameplay, the versatility of the game content, which is often not possible with the printed materials, real-time feedback, and personalization of the game experience. So if you have any thoughts, we would love to hear your feedback, any ideas that you might have. You could reach out to us through our email, or you can stay tuned about our progress in the website. I think now we're open to any questions.
So we have a question about what age group the game would be appropriate for. So we designed the game with middle schoolers and high schoolers in mind, just because of the kind of demographic groups that that were really critical to address based on the data that we have on media literacy or lack thereof, and based on the existing research. But we definitely think that it is more versatile, and it can actually work with older students too, with college students and with adults. With younger students, I think it would depend on the context, but we would definitely work with older users, and this is something that we're thinking about more now as we're thinking about the digital game, how to really ensure that it's versatile. And in the digital game, of course, you have a lot more opportunities to do so. I don't know, Yoo Kyung, if you want to add something.
Sure. I think one of the things that we found in an informal context, it has been played with the college level students as well. And surprisingly, they also were not too familiar with all the terms and skills that were embedded in it. And another thing is even the parents, the really grown-ups, we cannot assume that they're all very proficient with the new skills and knowledge that are necessary to navigate the current media ecosystem as well. So I think there is a room for collaboration and gameplay across different generations as well.
And I know that we're biased, but we played it a lot within MASCLab and we really enjoyed it.
I think it still would be. So there are, I did mention a few different ways that you could actually engage in the gameplay through virtual means. There are different ways you can still play the game by using a proxy, and also students collaborating over what to play next. And one of the things that we observed when we took the game into the classroom is that there is a lot of discussion that the students bring in talking around and about the cards and the game itself that actually does make it very motivating and engaging for the students. So I think there definitely is a room for it to be engaging, even if they're not playing just by themselves. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Hi, Jade. Thank you so much for your question. Yes, this is something that we've been discussing. We have been discussing it throughout the design process, and we're discussing it now as we're thinking about the next steps too. We do think that the game is very versatile, and even in the news stories that we chose, that we designed for the news cards, they're not really dependent on a familiarity with certain cultural references or certain like Western related settings. So I do think that it can be applied and played effectively in non-Western settings too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there might be some of the language, for example, in the news that may pertain to a particular language, but for example, are there all caps or the typos and whatnot? But those are really minor compared to much of the learning experience that go in and the skills that you bring in. For example, triangulating information from multiple sources and looking at who's writing this, what source they're coming from. Those are really universal. So we believe there is it's applicable across different cultures.
Mm-hmm. And also in the extension lesson plans that Yoo Kyung mentioned, a couple of them offer educators and students the opportunity to design their own cards. So this is another way in which it could be made even more versatile and more applicable to particular settings. If you maintain the structure of the game and the evidence cards, but design your own news cards, or keep the news cards and design your own evidence cards. So it does work as a template like that as well. So Rosemary is asking, are the students using actual current events? In this version of the game, no, just because like we mentioned earlier, because news literacy is so politicized, and because we noticed in our playtest, and also this confirmed by a lot of the research in the area, that students get distracted by contentious politics when talking about very politicized issues like fake news, we decided to go with this fictional environment of this sheep town of Green Meadows. So all the stories are about things that happen in Green Meadows. Some stories are slightly political, like for instance, there's an election in Green Meadows and there's different candidates and there's some mudslinging, things that happen in real life politics, but they're all set in this sheep town. So the candidates are sheep, the newspapers are sheep town newspapers. So that creates that we think needed distance so that students and educators can engage really with the strategies and not with the content.
But I think it's worth mentioning that while the game itself is apolitical, and in a sense that we do ground it in like a fictional narrative, what we wanted the educators to do as they bring it into their classroom is to apply it into their curriculum and their discussions in the classroom. So depending on what curriculum or content they're working on, and it may be news and the current events that you might apply the game into to discussing how to evaluate and understand the current events. So that's something that we would like the educators to play the role in connecting the game into different materials that they're working with.
Did we use an existing media literacy framework to come up with your primary learning objectives? Yes, we pretty much combined a few relevant media literacy frameworks as well as game-based learning frameworks. And I think I covered this very briefly, but it's worth unpacking a little bit. Our core aims, our core educational aims were to for players to demonstrate declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. So declarative knowledge are things that that you can notice, for instance, in a news story, like the URL looks sketchy or there's no author listed. And then procedural knowledge are skills that you can do, right? So you can go to Google and do a reverse image search, or you can go to another news source and see if they're saying anything about that story. So those are our two key aims, as well as understanding and assessing bias.
I think one thing that we could add to that is and the rationale for how we drew from multiple sources is really that we believe there are new learning goals, and especially in terms of the skills that you need to navigate through the current media ecosystem. And those are new as we come up with, as there are new different designs in the platform and how you could actually navigate through the different landscape. For example, there's like the fake videos that are coming out, and how would you actually find out whether it is real or fake, right? So those are new skills that keep emerging, and we wanted to make sure that we are integrating those new learning goals.
And actually, it was really interesting how we developed the cards. We had this big Google Sheets spreadsheet. It's called a card master spreadsheet. And for each one, so we had different tabs, for evidence cards and context cards and news cards. And in each one, there was a column that related to the literature. So for each single evidence card that we developed, we did have, a column that connected it to what we know based on existing media literacy education. And if you look at the cards, you can see our categorization. You can see the way that we thought about it, because 1 point evidence cards, and this kind of, I guess, like a secret of behind the scenes, 1 point evidence cards relate to the news story that you have in front of you, like the news cards. 2 point evidence cards relate to the source. So that's why all those 2 point cards are about the reputation of the source or their website or their social media profiles, asking you to go outside of the news story and check out who is saying this and why. And then the 3 point evidence cards are about the news event, or really what happened. So not the article itself, but the larger story. And those are the ones that ask you, for instance, to triangulate by going to other news sources, or to do the reverse image search, and so forth.
So Yue was asking about how we evaluated the effectiveness of the game, like how to make use of the audio recording field notes. I think that's more in terms of the research methodology that we use to evaluate with the evaluation data. What we have collected was really diverse and very qualitative in nature, because we went in and did a direct observation where we took field notes of different challenges and opportunities that came about as they were playing the game. We also gathered a lot of artifacts. So we had given them different tasks to do, which really should sort of connect the gameplay into the learning goals, but also it became the data for us to analyze how they're understanding it, how they're applying it in different places, and what misconceptions were emerging. So what we did was, with all the recordings, and also we have interviewed the teachers to understand how they integrate the game, what they did to prepare, what they did in the classroom, and how it went, as well as their students' work. So what we did was we took the whole set of different data and we coded them for some of the emerging themes to see what were the demonstrations of their understanding, what were some of the demonstrations of their misconception, what went well, what didn't go well. And that's how we went about analyzing the code to evaluate the effectiveness of the game overall. And the goals that we had were largely to, there's a link to our article that actually does, we just published to that documents this process and the findings. The goal was to see if the students were learning these declarative and procedural knowledge and skills. We also wanted to know if it was playable, and also how the teachers were integrating it into the classroom, because it is very important that for the game to have its life and do its role, it has to be integrated into the learning context as well. Multiple ways. How can I participate in the project? I think there are multiple ways, and there are multiple ways to collaborate with a card game, with a digital game. So I'm sure Ioana would have a few things to add as well. But I think there are. So I think one of the things that we know that there's a lot of educators who are tuned in today. We know that you are an indispensable and the most important sort of factor in making this successful. So we would very much invite you to play the game, integrate it into your classroom, and we would be happy to help you integrate it in a way that will work for you as well, through different resources. And we would love to hear back from you how it went and what you have done.
Yeah, so please feel free to contact us via email or on Twitter. And I was going to save this for the end, but I guess I can say it now. We really invite you to join the Media and Social Change Lab. This is really the home of the game. This is where it was born, and this is where it will continue to live for a while. So we're at MASCLab.org. We have our weekly meetings on Wednesdays at noon, and that's a general MASCLab meeting. And then at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, we have the LAMBOOZLED research group meeting. So I think you'll find that we are a very informal bunch. We're a supportive space. We are very open and welcoming to new members. So if you want to join us and you're interested in media literacy research, please join us. Some of the things that we're talking about now are the continuing development of resources for educators, the work on the digital game, the digital version of LAMBOOZLED, and then new research projects around media literacy that we're starting at this point around both youth media literacy and news consumption more generally, and around the election too. Thank you so much. And before you go, we want to invite you again to check out the game's website at tcpress.com/lamboozled. Like I mentioned, we will keep updating the resources there, and the game is available for purchase. And again, if there's anything that we can help answer or shed light on, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We would really like to thank Kira and her team for helping make this event possible. Again, we'd like to thank Jennifer and her team at TC Press, also Emily Fryer, who worked so hard on the digital marketing efforts around the game. This has really been a team effort, and we're very grateful for all the help.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.